Today's lesson is why you should read the classics. Hello, everyone. I'm Mike.
I am Roger, and today we're talking about why you should read the classics, and that refers to classic literature. And, of course, lots of those books are available for a cheap price online. So, yes, indeed, maybe you should consider reading those books. Maybe some of you might think, well, those books were written hundreds of years ago, and the English they used then is different from the English now. Why should I read a book like that? It's just going to make me more confused. But we do have some good reasons why you should read the classics, which we're going to be talking about today.
That's right. Classics are often written in language that's not familiar to us these days. I mean, they're written in the language you might speak, but in a style that people haven't spoken in or written in hundreds of years, so that can make them a challenge. And often the plots don't move along, don't have the excitement and the dialogue and the drama that we might expect from a book. So they can feel a little bit hard to read. I think a word we often use with a classic book is a slog. A slog is like if you're dragging your feet through mud on a rainy trail or something like that. It just makes walking so much harder with all that rain and mud and things stuck to your feet and whatever. So it's kind of a slog sometimes, these books are, but you can get benefits from them. It's like watching classic movies or appreciating old art. If you learn how the rules were made, then you can understand how the rules are broken later on in interesting ways. And often, also, it's the references. I mean, one of the things that always amazes me when I watch a Shakespeare play or something is how many of the lines and the sentences and the phrases from those plays have become common in normal speech or are used in titles or song lyrics. So to find the roots of a lot of our culture by going back and reading the classics can be a really interesting way of exploring the history of a country and a people and a language. So let's have a look at some good reasons why you should read the classics. We're not saying you have to read all of them, but maybe this will be enough to get you to crack open one of these classics, and who knows, you might decide that you actually like it.
Why you should read the classics. Classics are books that have been around for a long time and have influenced many writers over the years. Works such as Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen or The Dream of the Red Chamber by Cao Xueqin. Sadly, many modern readers think that classics just aren't worth their time. After all, they ask, why read books written tens, hundreds, or even thousands of years ago when you could read great modern novels instead?
大家好，第一部分介绍名词 prejudice， 它的意思是偏见或是成见。例如 Kim has a strong prejudice against dogs that seems to have resulted from some negative childhood experience. Kim 对狗有强烈的偏见，这似乎是由于一些负面的童年经历造成的。或者 Unfortunately, her grandparents still held on to the prejudices of the past. 不幸的是，她的祖父母仍带着旧时代的偏见。接着看到 chamber 这个单字，它是名词，表示特殊用途的房间、室、厅。例如 The ancient chamber was discovered beneath the castle's main hall. 这个古老的房间被发现位在城堡主厅的下方。或是 The captured spy was kept in a chamber for questioning. 遭到逮捕的间谍被留置在一个房间里接受盘问。
Okay, let's talk about the first paragraph in today's lesson. Of course, we're talking about why you should read the classics, okay? We could make this into a question. Hey, why should I read the classics? Well, here's why you should read the classics. And we're not talking about classic English literature only, like Dickens and Thomas Hardy and Shakespeare and people like that, but we're also talking about other classics from other parts of the world. We're going to make The Dream of the Red Chamber, which is a classic from China. You could also maybe read the Bhagavad Gita from India or the Ramayana from India. There are all sorts of different kinds of classics that you could check out. So here it says classics are books that have been around for a long time and have influenced many writers over the years. Works such as Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen or The Dream of the Red Chamber by Cao Xueqin. So those are some examples of classic literature. They don't have to be really huge books that are 1,000 pages long, but there are plenty of classics that are short enough for us to handle and read maybe within a week or so.
That's a really good point. A lot of people think of classics as being those big, heavy, thick books. But yeah, some of them aren't very long. In fact, I think Pride and Prejudice is just over about 200 pages. So it's really not much of a challenge. The language might be a challenge, but in terms of length, it's not much of a challenge. So Pride and Prejudice, very well-known book, turned into many different versions on television and in film. Pride is, of course, being too proud of yourself, right? Having pride is being proud. In other words, you think you're pretty good and maybe you think you're slightly better than other people. And prejudice is basically having sort of negative feelings against a person or a group of people. It's your opinion. It might not be based on fact or reality, but it's just what people think about something in a negative kind of way. So you might have a prejudice about people from a certain kind of country or a certain class or something like that. You've never actually met a person from that country or from that class. You just heard things or seen things on TV and suddenly you think, oh, all those people are all tricky. They're all trying to cheat someone or something like that. That's why I'll never go there on holiday. Well, you're showing your prejudice. You've never been there. You've never met anyone from there. How do you know? You're just taking negative opinion and you're turning it into a fact or a reality or just a way of sort of labeling a whole group of people. And that's, of course, what Elizabeth Bennet goes through in Pride and Prejudice. She has pride and prejudice against Mr. Darcy, and some of us know how that ends. And if you do want to know how it ends, read the book. Or The Dream of the Red Chamber, this great classic from Chinese literature. I'm sure a lot of you have read this. I read this. I worked my way through this. Again, not a super long book, but enjoyable in parts. The Dream of the Red Chamber is the title. Chamber meaning, of course, a room. A room of any type would be a chamber. It could be a smaller room. It could also just be a space in a certain place. So that is what we're talking about there. Sadly, it says many modern readers think that classics just aren't worth their time. They're long, they're boring, they're slow to read. I don't understand how people talk back then. That's the kind of thing you often hear when you ask people about reading these great old works of literature.
Yeah, and of course, people are used to playing on their phones all the time and watching videos.
That makes it worse.
So why do we want to sit down and read a book? I mean, we have to put our phone down and concentrate on all these words on the page. So maybe people want to watch movies that are based on these classics or whatever. So we're going to try to tell you exactly why we think you should read these kinds of books. And after all these people ask, why read books written tens, hundreds, or even thousands of years ago when you could read great modern novels instead or watch movies on your phone or whatever? There's always a really popular book that comes out. Yeah, why should I waste my time reading Pride and Prejudice when I could be reading something more fun that everybody wants to talk about?
Exactly. Harry Potter or John Grisham thrillers or things like that. Well, we're going to give you a few reasons why reading the classics might be something that you should think about doing and some good benefits of reading some of these great old stories. Let's hear about them in the next part of the article.
Well, reading the classics is important for many reasons. Despite their age, classics still contain great stories and touch on timeless themes like love, friendship, and bravery. Why would you miss out on a good story just because it's old? Surely a good story is a good story forever. What's more, classics can teach us a lot about how attitudes have changed throughout history. For example, Gulliver's Travels by Jonathan Swift, published in 1726, gives modern readers an amazing glimpse into 18th century attitudes towards science, religion, and politics.
第二部分看到介系词 despite， 它的意思是尽管、不管或是无论。例如 Despite working in a clothing store, Wendy didn't care about fashion. 尽管在服饰店工作， Wendy 还是不关心时尚。也可以说 Jessica continued to hike despite the rain. 尽管下着雨， Jessica 还是继续徒步健行。再来介绍动词 publish， 表示发表、出版、发行或是公布。我们可以说 That magazine is only published once a year. 那本杂志一年只发行一次。又或者说 Jake published a book about soap. Jake 出版了一本关于肥皂的书。接着看到名词 glimpse， 它的意思是一瞥或是一见。例如 I caught a glimpse of the sun through the trees as I walked in the park. 我在公园散步时，瞥见阳光从树林间透出来。又或者说 We only caught a glimpse of the man, so we can't describe him very well. 我们只瞥见那男人一眼，所以无法很仔细地描述他的外貌。
Okay, let's talk about the next part of our article. It says, well, we're going to tell you some of the reasons. Well, reading the classics is important for many reasons. Okay, so this sort of sets us up. We're going to tell you exactly the reasons why you should consider reading classic novels. Despite their age, classics still contain great stories and touch on timeless themes like love, friendship, and bravery. So despite their age, even though they are old, they still have these great stories. We all love a good story, don't we? And they touch on, or they kind of deal with, they mention timeless themes like love, friendship, and bravery. Yes, those themes are still around. They're in modern literature and they're in old literature as well. And it's a good idea to kind of see how these things were handled at different times.
There you go. And you don't want to miss out on something that's good. You don't want to have that pass you by and not have the opportunity to enjoy this good story. So why would you want to skip this good story, just sort of choose to not enjoy the good story just because it's an old good story? It says, surely a good story is a good story forever, no matter the age. What's more, here is another argument we're going to make, another reason we're encouraging you to read these classics. What's more, or furthermore, or also, that's basically just what we're saying, adding one point to another. Classics can teach us a lot about how attitudes have changed throughout history. Yeah, very true. It's kind of like a time machine. I mean, people can write stories about the 19th century in England, right? But you can also read books written in the 19th century in England about that time. So if you want to listen to history as told by the people who are actually living it, classic novels like this can sort of serve as a time machine to go back to the time when the writing was actually being done. For example, here's one, Gulliver's Travels by Jonathan Swift, published in 1726, gives modern readers an amazing glimpse into 18th century attitudes towards science, religion, and politics. So they won't just be describing the look of things or how people dressed or what food they ate. They'll also be talking about the philosophy, the culture, the beliefs of the time. And that's something a modern writer might have trouble communicating and might not fully understand, even if they're very familiar with the period of time that they're writing in. If I'm writing the year 2024, if I'm writing about something that happened in George Washington's time, well, I wasn't there. I might know a lot about it, but I wasn't actually living at that time. So this is something you can get through some of these classics. Gulliver's Travels is not actually set in the time. It's kind of a science fiction novel, a fantasy novel of its time. This is where this gentleman Gulliver gets swept off into a magical journey and he meets the really tall people, the really short people. He has all sorts of adventures, but it was written at that time as kind of a satire, as kind of making fun of people of that time and sort of doing it using this fantasy, using this science fiction sort of angle. But it really did have a lot of true lessons and real information and real attitudes that people had back at the time it was written, which was around 1726. It says that's when the story by Jonathan Swift was published. When you publish something, basically you make or print a book, magazine, newspaper, something like that. I guess you can publish things on the internet these days, right? You can put your short novel up there on the internet for people to watch. But really, when we think of publishing, we're thinking of putting the words onto paper, putting that paper into the form of a book, and then having that book get shipped out to the bookstores where people can buy it. So that's basically what we're talking about. When we see it written with a date, with a title, this is basically when the book was first made available in the market, when people in the public first got the chance to read this book, when the book was born, in other words. So this book was born or published in 1726, but it gives modern readers an amazing glimpse into attitudes from that time.
Right. A glimpse is just a short look at something. You may have caught a glimpse of a friend in a crowd. Hey, I saw Joe over there and I can't catch up with him. He's running away from me. And I just caught a glimpse. I just saw him for a second and he was gone. And here it gives us kind of a look at 18th century attitudes, which were in regard to science, religion, and politics. Yeah, how did people feel about these things back then? Yeah, maybe people back then thought that the Earth was at the center of the universe and they didn't have any idea about there being galaxies or the universe or whatever. And religion, did they all believe in God at that time? And how did they pray to God, etc.? And of course, how politics worked. So yeah, it gives us a glimpse into how people felt about those things. And it it would give us a perspective on how to interpret those things in modern times as well. We can, of course, learn about the present by studying the past. Okay, that brings us to the end of the second part of our lesson for today. Let's wrap things up now with the third and final part.
So don't dismiss classics as yesterday's news. Pick up some great books of the past. I promise that you'll be delighted with the result.
第三部分我们看到 dismiss 这个单字，它是动词，指的是不予理会、不考虑，也可以是解散的意思。举例来说， Bert dismissed the advice he received and decided to do things his own way. Bert 不理会他收到的建议，决定依自己的方法行事。或是 The politician dismissed the allegations against him as rumors. 那名政治人物将那些对他的指控当作谣言不予理会。最后看到形容词 delighted， 它表示令人高兴的、愉悦的或是乐意的。我们可以说 I'm delighted to be invited to your birthday party. 我很高兴受邀参加你的生日派对。也可以说Sarah was delighted to hear that her sister was coming to visit. Sarah 听到姐姐要来探访的消息而感到高兴。
All right, we are back with the third and final part of our article, trying to convince you guys, trying to encourage you guys to get out there and get a classic novel and read it for all sorts of wonderful benefits. Here's how we're going to wrap it all up. It says, so don't dismiss classics as yesterday's news. All right, if you dismiss something, that basically just says you choose to ignore it. You sort of say, nope, not for me. I don't want to know any more about it. I thought about it. I looked at it. Nope, not interested at all. And this idea is maybe you didn't give it enough of a chance. Maybe you're acting a little bit too quickly. You're not looking at it from another angle and trying to find a benefit from it. You're just like, nah, nope, not for me, without a lot of care and attention to why you're making that decision. You're just saying out of hand, nope, no thank you. So don't dismiss these old books as yesterday's news. An old novel? No, don't read old novels. I only read things written in the last 20 years. That's the kind of having that dismissive attitude, to use the adjective form. They're not yesterday's news. If something is yesterday's news, well, it's not really relevant or useful to you now, is it? Right? Don't tell me about the things that happened yesterday or last week or whatever in the news, because things have changed since then. So something that's yesterday's news is basically irrelevant and useless in your life.
Exactly. So, yeah, you should not dismiss those classics as being out of date and not valid for modern times. Yeah, you can learn a lot from those books. And also, I should mention that they're cheaper that way. I oftentimes download free classics from this website online called Project Gutenberg. I don't know if you've heard of that before, but there are probably other ones as well. If you want to read classic novels and not pay for them, you can certainly find ways to download them for free. Modern novels, of course, they'll charge you for those.
Yeah, I think even for some of these like Kindles and things like that, right? If the book is over 100 or 200 years old, it's basically free because they don't have lawyers running around collecting all the money.
Right. So, yeah, don't dismiss those classics as yesterday's news. Pick up some great books of the past and learn about the past. And yes, indeed, it can be a great way to spend an evening, a rainy day. Maybe if a typhoon's coming, you can stay home and read a classic book. It doesn't have to be an English book. It can be all sorts of different languages. And I promise that you'll be delighted with the result. And if you're delighted, you're very, very happy. Maybe your grandmother decided to come over and visit. Oh, I'm delighted to see you. It's such a pleasure to see you. What a pleasant surprise. Come on in. Let's sit down and have some tea.
Absolutely. And I think another thing that I would encourage people to do, don't treat it like some kind of school assignment. You don't have to read it and try to figure it out on your own. There's lots of ways you can find through the internet analyses of these books. And that's what I've often done. Sometimes I'll read the chapter and then I'll look up the basic breakdown of that chapter from another source just to make sure that I'm on track, because it helps you avoid the confusion confusion of some of the language. It helps you avoid losing track of the plot because things are written and sort of laid out in different ways. The pacing of the book is very different if it's an older book. So to keep yourself engaged, use some of those sort of cheat devices that are probably designed for students studying, but you can just use them on your own for your own pleasure and your own education. And I think a lot of those things can really help you sort of stay with the book, find it less of a drag, less of a slog, less like eating just a bowl full of vegetables or something like that. You know it's good for you, but it's not super tasty. If you use some of these other modern resources, you'll find that the book is more enjoyable and much easier to get through. And who knows, maybe that'll get you to read a second or even a third classic novel. All right, that's all the time we have. Let's go over to our lovely Chinese teacher who's read all of the classics, Hanny.
各位同学大家好，我是 Hanny。 我们来看今天的文法重点。许多现代读者认为经典名著不值得花时间，毕竟他们会问，为什么要在你可以读伟大的现代小说时去读数十年、数百年甚至数千年前写的书呢？好，文中他用到 after all，它可以用来说明理由或者是提出解释，就相当于中文的毕竟。那其实 after all 还可以用来表达结果跟先前的认知不同，相当于中文的终究怎么样啊，还是怎么样。像是 He said he had reconsidered and decided to quit after all。 他说他重新考虑了，终究还是决定辞职。好，那另外课文里面也有提到一些数量，我们整理一下。像 tens of 是指数十个， hundreds of 是数以百计的， thousands of 是数以千计的。那 tens of thousands of 就可以表达数以万计的， hundreds of thousands of 是数十万的，还有像 millions of 是数百万的，前面再加上 tens of，写作 tens of millions of， 那就可以表达数千万的。那这些用法呢，他们后面要接复数可数名词，只是要注意，有时候这些用法并不代表实际估计的数量，而是在强调说数量非常的多。好，那在课文第3部分，作者最后写到说，挑选一些过去的好书吧，我保证你会对结果感到满意。那文中它是用片语动词 pick up， 我们来整理一些常见的意思吧。好，第一个呢 pick up 可以表达购买，顺便采买，像是 I'll pick up some snacks on my way home， 我在回家路上会顺便买一些点心。第二个 pick up， 它如果用事物来当受词的话，那 pick up 可以表达说去取物啊，领取物品。如果是用人当受词的话，则可以表达接送某人，像是 I'll pick you up at your hotel at 7， 我7点去饭店接你。第三个我们可以用 pick up 表达举起、拿起、捡起来，还有像把婴儿抱起来也可以用 pick up 去表达。那我们看个例句是 Ed picked up his guitar and started to play。 Ed 拿起他的吉他开始弹奏。好，那第4个可以用到 pick up 去表达收拾、打扫，像是 Melissa helped her mom pick up the kitchen after dinner。吃完晚餐后 Melissa 帮妈妈收拾整理厨房。再来第5个 pick up 还可以表达学会、养成，像是 pick up bad habits 养成坏习惯。那还有像 pick up some slang 就是学会一些俚语。只是要特别注意，我们用 pick up 去表达学会一件事的时候，常常用来指非经过正统方式学习，就是可能是慢慢的从环境啊或机会里面取得实得的能力或兴趣。好，那以上今天重点整理，我们回顾今天单字吧。
Prejudice. It's important to avoid prejudice when meeting new people. Chamber. The prince's chamber was decorated with beautiful paintings. Despite. Despite his injury, Jordan continued to play in the basketball game. Publish. Shirley is planning to publish her first novel next year. Glimpse. The tour provides a glimpse into the history of the city. Dismiss. Reggie chose to dismiss the manager's negative comments and focus on his work. Delighted. Josephine was delighted by the surprise party her friends threw for her.
Discussion Starter starts now!
Okay, here's our discussion starter for today. In your opinion, what value do classic books hold in today's world? And should they still be considered an essential part of modern education?
When I think about the significance of classic literature, I consider that it's a good way to understand the roots of the modern world and your own culture. I think not learning the works of classic literature might be sort of like not reading diaries of your ancestors or something like that. You could learn so much more about yourself and who you are and how you've come to be if you read about things in the past. It's kind of like your own little personal time machine.
Sounds logical. Well, the role of classic books in modern education should be stressed because they teach us about the world when we didn't have all this high-tech stuff like phones and the internet and stuff like that, so maybe that would offer us a fresh perspective on those things. And also the fact that those classic books can be a great way to spend an evening when you don't have anything to do.
Well, that brings us to the end of another edition of our program, and please make sure you join us again next time. From all of us here, I am Mike.
I am Roger.
See you next time.